Good morning, everybody. My name is Angie Hughes, and I'm with Producers XL, and I want to welcome you to the Long Term. And this is going to be my podcast that I'll be having for the next several months. Actually, it's kind of something new for me, and I think you're really going to enjoy this format. What I'm going to be doing, and I'm very excited to bring to you Mr. Larry Moore with National Guardian Life, and what he has so graciously agreed to do for me is we are just going to kind of banter back and forth. We are going to talk about topics that are very relevant to the long-term care industry. We're going to talk about a wide array of things revolving around the whole topic of extended care planning, things that you maybe never have thought of, maybe things that you will help you think of them in a different light. So we're going to use this as kind of a back and forth, if you will. And I couldn't be more excited about this. So Larry, thank you very much for joining me today on this. And Larry and I have agreed that we're going to try to, we're not going to try, we are successfully keep this to 30 minutes because I think that's just about as much as we can digest. And even though Happy New Year, we're into 2021, the first quarter to the first half of that 2021 isn't going to look a whole lot different. So we want to bring you a format that is just quick and biteful pieces of knowledge and different concepts, if you will, around extended care planning. And Larry, what I find really interesting is I don't think no matter how much we talk about long-term care planning or extended care planning or, planning into retirement, there are still always going to be lots of misunderstandings, lots of misconceptions around extended care planning. And I really just don't think that we're going to find that those ever really go away. When we start thinking about, I can remember 20 years ago, our average issue age in the long-term care space was upwards of, 70 years old. Now it's gotten so much younger. And a lot of that has to do with, finding the healthier prospects. How do we drum up these conversations? But I wrote an article a while back talking about GoFundMe and how we're just seeing so many, you just can't be on Facebook or any other social media platform today without seeing some new GoFundMe page. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Families are in quite a bit of distress financially, but I think we need to think outside the box for some of our younger folks, and that there's actually a better way to protect yourself other than GoFundMe. So what are you seeing from the carrier perspective around the misunderstanding or misconception of I should really wait and buy this when I'm older?
That's a really good question. And it kind of drives me crazy. I've been in the industry like you, 30 years and worked with a number of carriers who are no longer in the business. And I'd like to say I've seen it all, but sometimes I still get surprised. But I think what the industry has done is boxed itself into a corner in terms of creating a perception that this is a product for old sick people. I don't know how many client workshops I've done over the years where I always ask the question, when you think of long-term care and long-term care insurance, what are the first thoughts that come to mind? And they say, old people, sick people, nursing homes, Grim Reaper stuff, right? So when you think about the Grim Reaper stuff, then if I am an investment advisor or I'm making this part of my practice and I'm not an LTC specialist, so they don't have that passion, they begin to ask themselves, do I want to sell hopes and dreams, meaning investment growth that will get you to your retirement successfully, or do I want to sell Grim Reaper? They kind of avoid the Grim Reaper. And I think as you probably lead me down this discussion, when you look at how the products are built and how they trigger benefits, you suddenly realize there's a much bigger universe to communicate to than just when you get old. And then it drives me crazy. They say, when you get old, you're going to get sick. And when you get sick, you need long-term care. I'm tired of that.
Yeah.
Because I like to take a step back, as you know. This is a defensive planning posture that we're creating as a way to create tax-free liquidity for people of any age. And I think, nowhere does it say in the contract, you've got to be a certain age to trigger benefits. All that has to happen is that you're either physically disabled or that there's a cognitive loss, and then the product will pay. So
And,
That's without taking too much time. Yeah, that's kind of the big picture.
yeah, and I love that because I keep saying that we're just stuck at this, what, 7 to 10% penetration in the United States for people, for buyers of long-term care insurance planning. Well, why is that? Well, let's just kind of point that finger back at us, right? Because
Hmm.
we're waiting too long. We are, as advisors to our clients, as agents to our clients, we are waiting too long. Actually, we're waiting for them, for the consumers to say to us, hey, I think I need to talk about long-term care planning, or I think I need to talk to you, or I need to get an illustration or a quote, or whatever the consumers are saying. We can't do that anymore because what we're doing at that point is I get that phone call and it becomes a health question conversation as opposed to a
Hmm.
true planning strategy about what's going to work. Because a lot of times you wait till you're too old and all we think about is, is eventually someday I'm going to be in a wheelchair with a shawl on my lap. It's too late. The underwriting's just too difficult at that point. And what I find interesting is we bump up against that challenge of, well, all these carriers, all they do is decline, decline, decline. Well,
Right.
I can't send them a 70-year-old with congestive heart failure and diabetes, but we're only taking, 40 units of insulin, and that's just not how it's going to work anymore. And
Right.
I think there for a while, didn't we see that salvation was, oh, well, we have these hybrid products. We've got life insurance. They'll take a bigger risk. No, they won't take a bigger risk. We need to have that conversation with our consumers at a much younger age, which means we have to be the proactive ones. We have to be the ones
Hmm.
having that conversation with them. And how do you do that? So how do you start talking to some of these younger folks that are, say, in their, you know, mid to late 50s, in their 60s? How can we bring that forward as a conversation with them? Because if you're familiar with Harley Gordon, right, the estate planning attorney, he says you
Hmm.
got to talk to those people that don't want to have a conversation with you, which means
Right.
you're going to talk to that 50-year-old male that has no desire to buy long-term care or extended care planning, whatever you want to call it, because he's never going to get sick. That's the
Right.
person you have to talk to because, right, we insure what we love, whether that's your car, your boat, your house, your life, your health. So, how do we go in and talk to these young executives and put that proper planning in place? And I love what you said there is kind of really position this as more of a disability conversation as opposed to a dreaded, yucky, grim reaper, nasty nursing home conversation. How do we
Yeah,
do that?
exactly. Great question because I think the epiphany for me was when I really started working a lot with investment advisors and financial planners who were managing risk. And again, they looked at long-term care as the final piece to the puzzle if their clients could afford it. Also talking to executives who are still in their working years. I think those two experiences really opened my eyes to a lot of things. And first and foremost, when we think about estate planning, retirement planning, and all about building wealth to retire, I always ask advisors on a scale of 1 to 10, what kind of value do you put on the work and the planning, the recommendations that you provide for your clients? And of course, it's a 9 or 10 because A, they're good at it, and they think what they're doing is really, really important. So then I'll ask the question, well, then, what is the one thing that could derail all of that great work, all of those insights and all that planning? And they kind of look at me like a deer in the headlights, like, what do you mean? I say, well, it's not a market correction because with every market correction, there's always a rebound. In fact, I've been around long enough to recognize that. Witness 2008, right? It's more to the point, if you truly believe what you're doing for your clients is good, has integrity behind it, then isn't it worth protecting that strategy? To add a defensive posture, if you will, into their planning. And I think COVID opened my eyes up to that as much as anything. I said, who would have ever factored pandemic into the risk management picture, right? Suddenly, all of a sudden, there's this pandemic going on. How has that impacted retirement planning for people, right? So when I think about those situations, I want to get away from talking about product and talking more about risk management because it could be an asset-based sale. It could be a traditional sale. That doesn't matter. The question is acknowledging that there's a 70% likelihood at some point in your life, you would have to be forced to deconstruct that portfolio at the least moment's notice, right? And that's where long-term care planning is. In fact, I see this now more and more than ever before as a foundational element to every planning strategy. And what do I mean by that? Well, this is the foundation. This is the brick and the mortar that's going to hold the house together and prevent it from collapsing on itself. So when I think of those advisors, I say, let's forget about age. Let's just talk about defensive posturing in our planning. And the question is, you show me, Mr. or Mrs. Advisor, you show me where you can create more tax-free leverage to pay future long-term care expenses than you can with a tax-qualified long-term care insurance contract, right? And what that does is open their eyes to the fact that, wow, okay, they've been looking at this backwards. They've been looking, this is the afterthought. No longer is it the afterthought. In fact, it's part of an integral component to a well-structured plan that is going to have longevity behind it. And taking it from that standpoint, also talking to people that are still working, right? I've done lots of executive carve-out work personally when I was in the business, and also engaged in a lot of carve-out strategies with the various carriers I've been with. And it's interesting. The advisors and the audience, the people in their 50s, all have the same common myth about what they perceive as long-term care, right? Old, sick people, nursing homes. I'm too young to have this conversation. Talk to me 10 years later, right? Mm-hmm. So when I suddenly have a group of employees, key executives between, say, 56 and 63 years old, right? They recognize the fact that, well, this is a nice idea, but we already have disability, don't we? Isn't that enough? And then the magic question is, well, you tell me, does disability get more expensive or less expensive the older you get? Well, of course, the company has to start continually paying more. And then at age 65, guess what? Gone. Disability goes away. So long-term care planning, as I structure it, I say, listen, here's the deal. Think about it this way. While we can't call our product a disability product, it certainly behaves like one, because you're either physically disabled, which of course we define as one's need for assistance with 2 of 6 activities of daily living, or that there's a cognitive loss, brain injury, brain trauma, you name it. Doesn't matter how old you are, doesn't matter what you were doing, doesn't matter how it happened. It's just that it's happened. And the question is, how are you going to fund that, right? And it's particularly devastating, which I have to remind executives, it's particularly devastating if it happens when you're too young. When you're still in that accumulation phase of your retirement. If you're going to be forced in your mid-60s to begin to decumulate because of a long-term care event, you're in a whole heap of hurt, right? So in many conversations I've had on this with executive teams, is they begin to think, my goodness, you know what, DI is important, and I won't downgrade the importance of that strategy. But now we're looking at, how do we structure a DI strategy for the rest of our life?
Right.
And now what we're seeing is long-term care insurance becoming a very attractive and practical augmentation to someone's existing benefits program, because this now is the DI play that's going to take them till the end of their life. So when we talk about this, get away from product, get away from the old paradigm, and down to risk management and efficiency of capital and attractive tax-qualified strategies. It's hard. They begin to see the importance. The light bulbs begin to click on to, oh, I could be a Christopher Reeves, couldn't I? He was only 45 years old when he became permanently paralyzed, right? Michael J. Fox, he was diagnosed with Parkinson's when he was 31 years old. Some say he's a little younger. He's my age. I mean, he's a little older than me. I'm in my mid-50s, but young people. Patricia Summit, if anybody knows that story, an amazing coach, diagnosed with Alzheimer's at the age of 59, died at 64. Another interesting thing. Well, if you're going to get Alzheimer's, or if you're concerned about Alzheimer's, if I can't afford to buy a lifetime, I don't want it. Well, it may not be a long-term scenario if it's frontal temporal, right? So anyway, I think that's where the discussion becomes a lot more relevant to younger people when you get it away from that old and sick to, it's more about risk management and a potential disability that could last a long time.
I couldn't agree more. And I love in one of our early conversations that you and I had, I loved when you said this, disabilities don't ask for permission. They just happen. And the article I wrote about GoFundMe just rings very true. And I love the idea of changing the conversation. What if we weren't talking about nursing home coverage? We were talking about planning strategies, and we were talking about, even if you're not even if you're not the financial advisor, maybe you're the property and casualty agent that's working with your consumers. But that means that your consumers probably have a financial advisor that they're working with on their investments. One of the two of you need to be having the quick conversation to just bring up extended care planning, because GoFundMe is not your solution. Thinking you can play the odds. I mean, right? If we went to Vegas and had 70% odds, that's very high. Or even if you
Right.
go down into another HHS study that shows 52%, I mean, it's not like they're getting better, that your odds aren't
Right.
necessarily getting better. And what if long-term care insurance was a guaranteed income stream? So completely change the thought process. It's nothing more than a guaranteed income stream to pay for your disability post age 65.
Mhm.
Not that a
Yeah.
disability can't happen prior to that, but when we start thinking about DI replacing income, long-term care insurance pays for that care. So now all of a sudden we're just talking about providing an income stream to that family if one of them needs care. For
Right.
me, a little bit of my story was when I bought my long-term care insurance policy, I was 41 years old, and I certainly obviously, excuse me, bought it because I'm in this industry. I wasn't going to go through another seminar where somebody said, "Well, Angie, do you own long-term care insurance?" And at the time, I was in my early 30s, and I said, "No, I don't." I was going to wait until I was in my 40s, which maybe was an excuse, maybe it wasn't, but I did purchase that insurance. And I tell people, I didn't buy my long-term care coverage because I thought my life was going to end up in a nursing home. I bought long-term care insurance because I needed to be able to know that my family could pay for my care without devastating the lifestyle of my spouse and the daughter that we were raising, and who, fingers crossed, is in her last semester of dental hygiene school, right? So we've got the college tuition going on as well,
Yeah.
just like many other folks that are in their 50s that are, you're starting to look forward. You're starting to see that horizon of the mortgage decreasing, the kids falling out of college and hopefully getting off of payroll out of the parents' checkbook. And so having that conversation in your early 50s is very relevant to them, because if we're not bringing up this conversation to them, maybe nobody is, or maybe somebody else is. And it really behooves you to protect the other insurances that you've helped them provide to protect their family as well. So it's just laying
Oh,
that
yeah.
groundwork. And really it's real
Absolutely.
it's I think what you described as well was very well. It's a ladder to your retirement. Just like you said, disability insurance is only going to cover paycheck replacement, but that does have an end site, right? 65, maybe 70 at
Mhm.
best, depending on how you bought your coverage. ONOC may or may not go out that far. So long-term care insurance actually kicks in when your disability falls off.
Mhm.
Not to
Yeah.
mention, we have a lot of folks that on this call are still selling in that Medicare space, and it makes a wonderful transition. Obviously, we're talking a lot younger than Medicare in our 50s, but if someone does decide to wait in their 60s or at 65, long-term care insurance is literally just an extension of what Medicare won't pay for.
Right.
And so there
Exactly.
are so many conversation pieces that we can have around extended care planning without talking about nursing homes.
Mhm.
The pandemic brought forth a real nice boom, if you will, in the traditional long-term care space again, because they're able to buy the protection that they want on a budget that fits their family's needs at this time. They're able to know that if they need home health care, because I've actually had consumers tell me that, hey, my spouse is on claim in a nursing home. I've brought him out of the nursing home due to COVID, and I'm going to
Mhm.
provide home health care through my policy. So a lot of folks are saying, I didn't realize I had that kind of flexibility. I had no idea I could. I mean, we hear it all the time. People say, look, take me home. I want to die at home.
Right.
People want to be
Right.
at home. They want to age in place. So I think these are wonderful. And the fact that you've talked about that foundational element of long-term care planning, really, we are not against hybrid products. I'm not against life long-term care combos, but I will probably, until it's never available anymore, tell people that you're probably never going to find the amount of benefits you get out of a traditional contract versus a life insurance policy, just by the nature of the beast and how you have to build them, right? So
Right.
you almost always put inflation on a traditional contract. It's
Mhm.
also got the partnership protection, which is perfect for that middle America, right? They have something
Yep.
to protect. They might not have millions to protect. So,
Right.
the partnership program is very relevant to those folks as well. And I love the fact that we can also talk about, every day, and it's not a doomsday, it's not a scare tactic, it's not a fear tactic, but every year we celebrate a birthday, and we should be very
Yep.
happy about celebrating that birthday, right? Because that just means we've made it to another year. But the fact of the matter is we can all sit around and talk about how with every aging birthday we have, we maybe get a new crink, or a new little hitch in our get up, or whatever the case is. So I think it's easy for all of us to go forward and think about, at some point in my life I probably will need some level of care. I hope in my case it's a very short duration home healthcare stay. My mind doesn't take me to a dreaded nursing home. And again, a little bit back to my story is somebody asked me, Angie, tell me why you're so passionate about long-term care insurance. And I can tell you, it's it's not because I have the story. I don't have my family members spending decades, even 10 years, even 5 years in a nursing home for extended care. My mother, that was her biggest fear. She'd had a couple of strokes. She thought for sure she was going to end up in that dreaded Grim Reaper wheelchair nursing home. And it was just a nightmare of hers. And our family deals with cancer, heart, stroke, which coincidentally is some of the leading reasons, not the longest, but the leading reasons for long-term care claims.
Mhm.
So those are definitely shorter durations. We shouldn't be afraid to sell a shorter duration policy based on that family's genetics. I think there's a lot of conversations that we can have about building the right strategy for your consumers, but I wholeheartedly believe it comes from us starting the conversation.
Mhm. Right.
It's about
Yep.
having that talk. I joke around, and I don't know how well I expressed this in a written article. I said, when we have 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old children, we have the talk, right? The birds and the bees
Right.
talk with them. Have we ever thought about having the talk with our parents
Right.
as middle-aged adults to our parents, having that talk with them? Mom and dad, do you have a strategy in place if you were to need care? My mom would ask me all the time, Angie, is there something I can buy to protect me
Right.
from this? The answer was no. 2 strokes, diabetes, congestive heart failure. Of course, the answer is no. So it's kind of interesting to me how we can kind of shift that mindset to the younger buyer. Start the
Right.
conversation younger. Talk about it being a strategy. Talk about it being an income stream. And Larry, I don't want to monopolize the floor here. If you have, I'll stop talking for a while and kind of check the comments if you have anything you want to say.
Yeah, you brought up something very interesting too. You mentioned about life insurance, and I have life insurance. Most people do. Most people are concerned they may not have enough. Now, if you have a serious estate planning need, you have a multi-million-dollar estate. Oh yeah, life insurance is an invaluable tool. But I think what opened my eyes up about that, my father passed away a couple years ago. He had that much life insurance. In fact, he canceled his policy for some reason. I don't know why. And you know what? I wouldn't have cared if there were, if it was a $500,000 payout or a $200,000 payout. We had expenses in the range of $40,000, $50,000, some taxes. Even a small policy would have been all that we needed. And, I think about middle-class families, which we are one. And an old friend of mine who sold us our life insurance called me and said, we need to update your life insurance. I think you could use some more. And I said, you know what? I have plenty of life insurance because if I died tomorrow, taxes are paid, the mortgage is paid. That's all. I don't want to leave my kids with a mess. I also don't need to leave them rich. I'm going to actually probably get more long-term care insurance. Right. That's the problem. That's the burden. To saddle my kids with that financial burden while I'm still alive would be kind of unconscionable. And, when I think about my family, my grandfather, I thought, was an interesting textbook case where his financial advisor, back then they were stockbrokers, right, discouraged him from buying long-term care insurance. So you don't need that stuff. You got plenty of money. And he had money. There's no doubt about that. He had the money. I begged and pleaded, and he at least got a nursing home plan. He says, well, if it's so bad, then at least I can go to the nursing home. Well, let's fast forward. He bought that policy probably 35 years prior to when he moved in with us. I moved him into our home. And you know what? I got to make the phone call to his stockbroker, his advisor. And it was so funny because he thought it was my grandfather, John, calling, and he picked up the phone. And my grandfather's sitting right next to me, by the way. And he says, John, how are you? It's good day. I haven't talked to you in a while. And I said, this isn't John. This is his grandson, Larry. And you said, all he could say was, oh, he's literally speechless. I said, here's the deal. We've got about $12,000 of monthly expenses now that we're going to need to somehow fund for his care in our home. And I assume you have some sort of plan in place to do this in the most tax efficient way. What do we do? You could have heard a pin drop because he knew he didn't do any planning. He knew that. And when you think about it, here we are with an 89-year-old man in our home, suddenly thrust into 2 tax brackets higher than he had been in probably 25 years. Terrible planning. So good asset manager, but a terrible planner, right? And that's very common because they're all thinking about the old notion, as long as you have the assets, you can pay for your care.
Don't we hear that so often too? Right.
I'd rather have dollars rather than pennies to pay for my care, So, those are kinds of the thoughts I think for, to kind of really galvanize middle America. A little bit of life insurance to alleviate the bills and the primary headaches financially that might occur is important. But I can argue that I feel like I'm in this position when my broker called me. The long-term care event presents a much more difficult and unpredictable problem. You only die once.
Right. Yeah.
But with long-term care, it happens, and God only knows how long you're going to be paying the bills until the money's gone or you pass away. So open-ended risk.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Larry, I can't thank you enough. This is so much fun. This is just so much fun for me to have these conversations, and we're kind of rolling right up on our 30 minutes. So I just want to thank everybody for joining us. Just know that this podcast is going to be going every single month through June. And it's the last Tuesday of every month. So as you subscribe to one, just like a podcast, you're going to subscribe to the rest of them. So we will have them on demand. If you can't make it, don't worry about it. We will make sure that this is recorded and up on our website so that you can listen at your leisure when that's most convenient. So without more being said, Larry, again, thank you. I look forward to next month's podcast, and thanks everybody for joining us. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks for having me. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.